Chapter 28, October 21, 1963, late morning. Once the case for the defense begins, Miss Gold tells the jury she's got a witness who can prove Uncle Bump would never wreck Old Man Adams' land. My witness, Mr. Pennington, will demonstrate that Bump Dawson is not a man who seeks revenge, but a man who seeks justice, she says. A small white man with a white beard totters to the stand. With his fancy suit and suitcase, I reckon he's very important. While he wobbles up the side aisle, he checks his pocket watch, and I can't believe it takes me all the way till this little man has sworn the Bible and locked inside the witness box to remember who he is. Old Man Adams' lawyer, the man who gave me the television. Mr. Pennington is his name. Did Mr. Adams ever mention anything about his head servant, Mr. Dawson? Miss Gold asked him. Well, Mr. Pennington says, Mr. Adams did tell me it was because he was impressed by the hard work of his Negro hands and the kindness shown to him by Bump Dawson in particular that he wrote his will as he did. And by the way, just what did Mr. Adams write in his will? It's common knowledge, Mr. Pennington says. I reviewed this months ago. Remind me, Miss Gold says. While Mr. Pennington checks his pocket watch a second time, I start to heat up because I reckon this little man thinks he's got somewhere more important to be. Then he unlocks his suitcase, pulls out a heap of paper, and reads, I bequeath my gold pocket watch to my head servant, Bump Dawson. To Elmira Grady, my cook, I leave my Dutch oven. To Miss Addie Ann Pickett, my cook's assistant, I leave my television set. I hereby bequeath my furniture, my books, and the remaining contents of my home to my alma mater, Ole Miss. The house itself will be used as a gathering spot for the people of Cuckoo. I expect the annual Christmas party to carry on without me. Most importantly, I leave my land to all the people of my community. Together, whites and Negroes shall plant a garden. When Mr. Pennington finished reading the will, a man in the first row roars, That will, it's a fake, a lady yells. Everyone knows Mr. Adams was sicker than a tick stuck in sap, and there's only a handful of folks in the courtroom with their jaws still hinged together. Of course, the judge calls for order, but he's got to bang his hammer 6 times before everyone settles enough for the trial to go on. And one thing's clear. If I don't get a chance to tell them what the night said, folks with common sense and ordinary logic will pin this crime on Uncle Bump. And if Uncle Bump spends years behind bars without our family, without his harmonica, I wonder if he'll still have the will to live. It's a question I hate to ask, an answer I dread to hear. Mr. Hickok folds his arms around his chest. He struts up to the little lawyer, Mr. Pennington, and says, Now correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but it doesn't require a stretch of the imagination to believe that when Mr. Adams passed away, Charles Bump Dawson felt he deserved the man's land. As Mr. Adams' head servant, Bump had grown rather uppity over the years. Some who observed Bump say he even acted as if he'd forgotten his color, since he took care of the old man like he was his very own son. Mr. Hickok rocks back on his heels. Now, if in fact what you say is true, Mr. Adams did indeed leave his land to all the people of Cuckoo, then it stands to reason that when the Negroes were excluded from the sunrise picking, they could have been mad, but Charles Bump Dawson would have been the angriest of all. Wouldn't you agree? Mr. Pennington covers his face with his hands and shakes his head like he can't stand to say Cuckoo one more second. Then he sighs and says, I suppose given the circumstances, yes, it's possible Bump Dawson could have grown angry, but he's just a convenient scapegoat for the injustice that has occurred here. What is a scapegoat? I whisper to Mama. I reckon it's someone folks can blame for their trouble, she says. Now Mr. Pennington pops up, unlocks the witness box himself, and hurries out the courthouse door. And I've got another question for Mama. Why won't he stay and fight, I whisper. Clean folks don't want to get dirty, she whispers back. And even though I don't have the foggiest what Mama means, I'm not about to get in a long discussion here in the courthouse, not when Miss Gold's calling my very own uncle to the stand. Uncle Bump trudges to the witness box. His shackles clang. He doesn't bother to lift his feet. They just slide along the floor. He doesn't try to stand up straight and proud. His shoulders sag. But when I see his fists clench at his sides, I get some hope, because hands ready to punch tell me he'll fight for his cause. You know how you can half close your eyes and everything looks fuzzy? Well, if you half closed your ears, everything would sound blurry and you'd swear you were sitting in church listening to the Reverend and Mrs. Montgomery. That's because at church, every time the Reverend says something, Mrs. Montgomery always shouts back, Amen. Even when the Reverend says, Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery yells, Amen. And that's how it sounds with Miss Gold and Uncle Bump. No, ma'am. Or did you ever visit the garden after the planting? Miss Gold asks. No, ma'am, Uncle Bump shouts. After the planting, did Mr. Mudge hire you to weed and water the garden? Miss Gold asks. No, ma'am. Do you hate all white people? Miss Gold asks. No, ma'am. Do you blame all white people for what happened to your nephew, Elias Pickett? No, ma'am. Did you ever break into the garden cabin? No, ma'am. Mr. Dawson, did you or did you not plant butterbeans all over the community garden? No, ma'am. No further questions, says Miss Gold. The service is over, and back here in the colored viewing gallery, our good spirits are flying all over the place. But that's all wrecked the second Mr. Hickok swaggers to the witness box. We've already established that Mr. Tate sold the butterbean seeds to Mr. Adams, he says. He straightens his bow tie and turns to Uncle Bump. After your brother-in-law went and got himself killed, you were saddled with the burden of his offspring, meaning your hands were surely fuller than you wanted them to be. Mama squeezes my hands so hard I stop worrying about throwing up on the courthouse floor and stop worrying about my fingers will break off at the knuckles. Objection, Miss Gold shouts, leading the witness. Sustained, says the judge. Redirect questioning, Mr. Hickok. Yes, sir, said Mr. Hickok. Then, to make matters worse, you learned Mr. Adams' garden was supposed to be shared, yet you were not invited to the first garden club meeting. Now, with all that going on, you will admit that you were an angry fellow, were you not? Uncle Bump stares straight ahead at the viewing gallery, but he doesn't say a word. So Mr. Hickok leans over the railing around Uncle Bump and shouts all rough and mean, "Answer me, boy!" A blue vein bulges down the center of Uncle Bump's forehead. Then Mr. Hickok yells even louder, "Answer me, boy!" And Uncle Bump explodes. "I'm a man." His 3 words rumble through the courthouse like sentences, paragraphs, books. "Aha," Mr. Hickok says. He raises his right index finger. "Indeed you are a man, a very angry man." Objection, leading, Miss Gold cries. Overruled, the judge bangs his hammer. It's logical to assume an angry man like you would break in the garden cabin and plan over the entire field with butterbeans to get revenge. Correct, Mr. Hickok says. Uncle Bump clenches his teeth. "Speak up, boy, I can't hear you," Mr. Hickok says. "A tear hotter than Mama's iron burns down my cheek. I'm mad enough to slaughter a hog with my bare hands. I see how our case, it's coming apart. How the law, it's not on our side. My throat burns raw as buckwheat. I know what I need to do, but I don't know quite how to do it. How can I, Addie Ann Pickett, get up there in front of all these people? How can I, Addie Ann Pickett, tell them what the night told me?" But now the crickety crack of a door rings out from the back of the courtroom, and a flush splashes through the viewing gallery. "What have we here?" the judge asks. He lifts up his glasses and squints at the back of the room. I turn in my seat, and what do you know? There's Mrs. Tate with Miss Springer. "If it pleases the court," Miss Springer calls out, "my friend Penelope Tate has some rather intriguing evidence to present." The judge lowers his glasses back down on his nose. "Oh, I see," he says. "The lovely Mrs. Tate. Come on up." Miss Springer gives her friend a gentle push forward. Then Mrs. Tate swivels down the center aisle in her pink dress and white hat. She looks just like a movie star, just like Audrey Hepburn. Chapter 29, October 21, 1963, noon. When Mrs. Tate arrives at the front of the courtroom, she chats a few seconds with Miss Gold. Then Miss Gold talks to the judge, and before long, Mrs. Tate's resting her palm on the Bible, swearing to tell the whole truth. "I'm not one for speaking to the public and all," Mrs. Tate says soon as she's settled in the witness box, "but my friend Miss Springer brought me here, and my mother's watching my son because I've got something to tell y'all." "Mrs. Tate, if you'll forgive me," says Mr. Hickok, "you appear on edge. Truly you don't need to testify. We've already heard from your husband, which is good enough for the both of you so far as I'm concerned." Mrs. Tate closes her eyes like she's trying to erase the ugly sight. But sorry for her, when she opens them back up, Mr. Hickok's still there. So Mrs. Tate says, "Excuse me, Mr. Hickok, but I wouldn't be here if I was just going to repeat what my husband already said." It's amazing how Mr. Hickok just slinks away. "Just talking from personal experience," Mrs. Tate says, "I think a lot of you would be surprised to know I was actually quite a good student in school. I've got more going on than what you see. But folks don't seem to want to believe 2 things. Beauty and brains can go together. What's more, for the love of the Lord," Miss Springer cries out from the back of the courtroom, "quit whistling, Dixie." "But I'm not whistling Dixie," said Mrs. Tate. "It's a similar case here. Folks don't want to believe that the person who disrespected you and me and everyone who worked so hard in this garden, the person who doesn't care whether we eat or don't eat as long as he eats, the person who has our respect but doesn't deserve it, could actually be, well, one of us. Folks would rather believe what's easy. A Negro committed this crime. But the truth is more complicated." With that, Mrs. Tate reaches into her purse, takes out a sheet of newspaper, and hands it to the judge. "This should help solve the puzzle." "Looks like a sheet from the Delta Daily to me," the judge says, "and the date on it." The judge lowers his glasses on his nose. July 18, 1963. "Exactly, sir. If you turn that new sheet over, you'll see that scrawled beside the crossword puzzle is the list of all the seeds that were left in Mr. Adams' garden cabin at the time he died. Mr. Mudge wrote up this list at one of our garden club meetings. As you can see, Judge, according to Mr. Mudge, when Mr. Adams died, there weren't any butterbean seeds left in his garden cabin. No butterbean seeds at all." "And so, Mrs. Tate?" asked the judge. "And so the idea that someone broke into the shed and stole the butterbean seeds that ruined our garden doesn't amount to a hill of beans," Mrs. Tate says. "But this does," she adds. Then she digs to the bottom of her purse and plucks out a long slip of yellow paper like it's quarrelsome buttercup wrecking her lawn. She hands it to the judge. I crane my neck off my backbone trying to make out what that long strip of yellow paper could be. What a slip of paper could possibly have to do with mud, tears, and vines, I can't imagine. The judge smooths out the slip with his palm and checks it through his magnifying glass. Mrs. Tate has more to say. "It's like this," she begins. The second she opens her mouth, though, the judge holds up his hand like she should shut it back up. But I reckon Mrs. Tate is sick of waiting for the judge to figure out what she already knows, because she plows ahead to tell her story. "Just yesterday I'm looking for the perfect outfit for this trial," she says. "I pick out a yellow dress, a 2-piece with satin trim. Of course I wouldn't think of wearing that darling dress without my yellow chiffon hat to match. So I search my closet. I open all my hat boxes, one by one, but no lemon chiffon. And I'm wringing my hands because I don't know where else my hat could be. Not unless I stuck it in one of my husband's hat boxes by accident." "Objection," Mr. Hickok rules and calls and stands. "Irrelevant." "Overruled," said the judge. "And don't be rude to the lovely lady." "So I stand on my tippy toes," Mrs. Tate says, "and when I pull down one of my husband's hat boxes, I hear a strange rustling sound inside. I remove the cover, and there, where his cowboy hat used to rest in peace, are all these long slips of yellow paper instead. I pull them out one by one, then by handfuls. Mrs. Tate stares down at the jurors. Then she tells the most exciting part. I get a closer look at one of those slips and I'll be, she says. What I see in my hand is... What? Asked the judge. What do you see in your hand? Oh, Mrs. Tate says, just the key to the Butterbean fiasco. She bats her blue eyes. Few must know and she says, it wasn't a Negro who planted the Butterbean seeds and ruined our harvest. The jurors sit still as the butter sculpture at Old Man Adams' Christmas party. As you can see, I never did find my lemon chiffon hat, so last minute I had to switch my whole color scheme to this, Mrs. Tate says and touches the sleeve of her pink dress. Halfway up the center aisle, I see Delilah. She's sitting on the courthouse floor, shaking her head in sympathy with Mrs. Tate, who tried to dress to match the day but failed. In any case, Mrs. Tate said, it pains me most of all to say this. My husband, Ralph, never sold the Butterbean seeds to Mr. Adams. He sold them to... Mrs. Tate looks down at her hands like she's trying to see if she carried her courage here today. When she looks back up, I can tell by the flash of anger in her eyes that she did. He sold those Butterbean seeds to Mr. Mudge. The picture in my mind slid into place like a television show. Fact is, she said, my husband did make this hefty sale, but Judge, that paper in your hand proves he sold seeds to Mr. Mudge, not Mr. Adams. That is a receipt of sale, Judge, receipt of sale. If you look down there at the bottom, you'll see Sam Mudge's signature. Now, Judge, when I was a schoolgirl, I thought that mathematics I studied was a bunch of hooey. How is all that multiplication and division going to help me? Mrs. Tate laughs. Funny, it's coming in rather handy today. What do you mean? The judge asks. Well, Judge, there that receipt in your hand shows my husband, Ralph, sold 321,204 Butterbean seeds to Mr. Mudge on July 22nd this year. That was just a few days after the last garden club meeting when we finally decided what to plant. Now then, we all know that the vegetable garden is 6 acres. So if there are 923 Butterbean seeds per pound, and it takes 58 pounds to cover 1 acre with thick vines, then you can see that to cover 6 acres would require, well, 348 pounds, or, Mrs. Tate rolls her eyes up in her head. When they fall back down again, she says, exactly 321,204 seeds. And if the seeds are sold in 50-pound sacks, then to cover 6 acres, you need, her eyeballs roll up and down again, 7 sacks, she said. I reckon I'm proud Mrs. Tate can do Butterbean math in her head too. But now Mrs. Tate's smile fades. My husband Ralph may not be the cheeriest man in Cuckoo, she says, but he is loyal to his friends, and that's why I hope you'll forgive him for standing up for his friend Sam Mudge, who started him out in seed sales in the first place. I know Ralph is so shocked by this Butterbean crime he can't come to see the truth yet himself. But we all have a little space in our hearts where the truth resides, even if we don't want to look there. And I know eventually my husband will look into that space and be proud of me. Proud I stood up for all of us who planned this garden. And so you might say I'm doing this favor for my husband, sparing him from getting into the awkward position of turning in a friend who was already turned on him. In the back of the courtroom, Miss Springer applauds. I see lots of hats bobbing up and down. Pink hats, black hats, blue hats. It seems all the ladies in the viewing gallery have turned to their neighbors to whisper. Then a gravelly voice sounds, traitor, and folks go crazy. Some holler as Mrs. Tate as she leaves the witness box. The judge bangs his hammer. And me, I've got to get to the stand. I've got to prove what Mrs. Tate says. It's the no doubt about it, 100% honest to goodness truth. Chapter 31. October 21, 1963, early afternoon. At long last, it's quiet in the courtroom. Now's my chance. I press past Mama's knees, fly down the center aisle, and wave my hand like I've figured out the answer to the challenge problem at school. It all makes sense. My dream, I know it's true. I know I've got to tell Miss Gold what the night said. But the judge sees me first. What on earth is this spectacle? He roars. Please, Your Honor, says Miss Gold. She bumps Dawson's knees. Get her out of here, the judge shouts. The next thing I know, 2 court officers lunge at me from both sides. They wrap their fat hands round my arms and lift me in the air. Then thwack. A loud thud vibrates from the back of the courtroom. I turn my head. There's Mrs. Jacks slamming her walking stick into the courtroom floor. And dog my cats. I reckon even Mrs. Jacks missed school for real important things. Your Honor, if you would permit for one more unscheduled witness, I would like to call this girl Addie and Pickett to the stand, Miss Gold says. White folks howl with laughter. The judge bangs on hammer again, but the shrieking giggles roll on. I shuffle my legs in the air like I'm riding an imaginary bicycle, which is the only kind I've ever had, so I know just how to do it. And the news reporter takes pictures of me with his Polaroid instant camera. One thing's clear. The judge is good and scared this mess in his courtroom will be tomorrow's front page news, because at long last he gives in. Fine, he yells over the hubbub. Bring her up. When the officers drop me in the witness box, I look out at all the people laughing at me. And the strange thing is I know just what to do. This time I don't need my brother's instructions. I stand up, but I don't look down the way Mama always said I should. Instead, I raise my eyes to stare, no glare, at the members of the Cuckoo Garden Club. I see blue eyes sinking in pity, hazel eyes tickling with gossip, and brown eyes burning with heat. And I see other eyes like Honeyworth's quivering with questions. The next minute stretches like a 49-car railroad train. My silent protest swallows up the laughter one guffaw at a time. I fix my eyes on Mrs. Worth's. Right away, she sits up straight and fiddles with the hat on her head. At long last, there's more order in the court than there's been all day. The court clerk holds the Bible in front of me. I swear to tell the whole truth, so help me God. When I hear those words, I think how much the whole truth can hurt. Lickety-split, it flashes through my mind. A morning not long ago. We were in the middle of a math test. Mrs. Jacks stepped into the hall to talk to the principal. I could feel Jeremiah Taylor's eyes bored a hole into my paper from behind me. When Mrs. Jacks hobbled back in the room, she said, "I presume we've all kept our eyes on our own papers, have we not?" And right then I said, "Yes, ma'am," along with all the others. I reckon you could say I didn't tell the whole truth because Jeremiah was cheating and I didn't let on. And I wondered if I was a bad person after that. But then, what good would it have done to me to tell on Jeremiah? Now I sit down in the witness box. "Is there something you'd like to say?" Miss Gold asks. Here I am, sworn to tell the whole truth and everything, so I imagine I'm not in a courtroom, but in a classroom. Mrs. Jacks's room. I picture myself in school, but after school, talking to the teacher who cares what I've got to say. I open my mouth, and what do you know? For once in my life, a bushel of ripe words fall at my feet. "The evidence," I say. "It's in the woods next to Mr. Mudge's farm." "Blasphemy!" cries Mr. Hickok. A breeze blows through the open window. I describe what I saw when Flapjack and me dashed through the forest the day Honeyworth wanted me to run. The judge twirls the hammer in his hand. I bet he's afraid the news reporter will follow my clues even if he doesn't. And then how will it look if the evidence turns up? So at long last he bangs the hammer down and says, "The lawyers, the witnesses for the defense, the jurors, and me, we're all going to get to the bottom of this nonsense once and for all. Officers, see to it no one else moves from this court." He points to the news reporter. "Jot James, you come along too. I know you'd prefer to photograph the Miss Sweetheart competition, but today we'll need your camera to document the evidence and check the veracity of what this young lady says." Then the judge looks straight at me and says, "Young lady, if what you say is not verifiable," he warned, "be warned, I can try you for perjury." Thanks to Mrs. Jackson and her Latin roots, I cracked the judge's secret code. By using the words verifiable and perjury, the judge is telling me that if I don't prove what I say is fact, the law will come after me and I'll face a jury all my own. A court officer hooks the latch on the witness box and opens the gate. Then he grabs me by the arm again, right in the spot where it burns. He pulls me out of the seat, but I shake off his grip. I can walk by my own self. I'm not under arrest. When I look back at Mama, she puts her hand to her lips and blows me a kiss. But it's not a kiss with a smile. It's a kiss with a prayer. Miss Gold walks with me across the court. We follow the judge through his private room. The shelves brim with more books than I've ever seen in my life. I only wish I could stay here to read them. I wish I could forget my uncle's freedom depends on whether I can find the evidence in the forest. When we leave the judge's private room and walk out to the courthouse in the parking lot, I shield my eyes from the bright sun. "Do you know exactly where the evidence is?" Miss Gold asked me. I nod, but truth be told, I don't. Well, not down to a gnat's eyebrow. Here I've left half the county sweating inside the courthouse on account of the fact I'm supposed to turn up evidence to clear my uncle's name. I reckon I might as well make a run for it now, because if I can't make good on my word, Uncle Bump might never come home to our family again. Heck, I might get locked in the jailhouse too.